Welcome to this last day of this fantastic multi-stakeholder platform meeting on the internet. It has been a challenge for us, I think, but it has been working very, very smoothly. So this global closing day is the task is given to us within the academia research cluster of the GASL, and my name is Ulf Megson. I'm in that cluster, of course, and I'm also the chair or the coordinator of the livestock antimicrobial partnership within GASL. Next slide, please. You're not muted, Eduardo, I think. As I said, this was the first GASL online meeting, and we have had a series of regional preparatory components organized by the GASL partners around the world. This meeting is composed of 4 days sessions, 2.5-hour sessions in the afternoons if you're in Rome. And now we have reached the final day, the global closing and global synthesis and action points. And this is indeed a big task for us, but we do our very best. Next slide, please. I want to emphasize that this summer day is a collective effort by the academic research cluster. It's Nancy Bourgeois in Switzerland, our chair, Rogerio Mauricio from Brazil, our co-chair, Ernesto Reis from Colombia, Liz Wedderburn, New Zealand, Alexander Ikovic from France, and myself. And I want to re-emphasize that we indeed want to have your inputs, because we're talking here about a little bit about the future, or quite a lot about the future, and action points to move the agenda forward. So please use the chat. Next slide, please. I leave the floor to Eduardo. He wanted to say a few words. Please, Eduardo.
Thank you very much. This is our contact information in the GASL partnership. You can find information about this meeting in www.livestockdialogue.org. All the presentations and all the documents and even the meeting recordings are there. But I especially would like to use this moment to thank all the partners of the global agenda and many stakeholders that have taken the challenge together with the Secretariat and the chair to organize this meeting with these different means. It's been a real experience that we plan to build on, so that from now on we are probably going to have to use these technologies. So we want to recognize that GASL is willing to adapt and willing to take new challenges, and organizing this meeting with 8 regional components has been one of the best challenges we've ever taken. So thank you very much to all our partners, all our team workers, all our stakeholders that have been involved in this effort. Thank you all. Back to you.
Thanks, Eduardo. I cannot more than agree on this, indeed. Next slide, please. So just to repeat the meeting protocols here, this is very important. Please keep your line muted. Only speakers use cameras. I see quite a lot of people in the thumbnails now. Questions for all the 3 candidates should be, oh no, we will aim to address all questions from the chat. We cannot promise that we do everything there. And for your information, this meeting is being recorded to be posted on the GASL website. This is important. And this meeting is also web streamed currently live from the FAO website, just so you know this. Next slide, please. An interpretation is available in English, French, and Spanish, and can be selected on the bottom of your screen. It says it's a globe, it says interpretation. And don't use your built-in computer microphone, use a USB headset instead, or a wired cell phone earphone mic, not Bluetooth. Further on, an external USB wired microphone is the next best solution. If several participants, yeah, maybe this is not relevant now. Connect your computer via Ethernet cable and to your router and disconnect other devices. Have your video on when you take the floor. In a virtual meeting like this one, audio quality may deteriorate unexpectedly and become insufficient for interpretation purposes. Then they will intervene and tell us this, and they come back as soon as the sound quality permits. So again, those of you who are not speaking, please also turn off your videos, because it reduces the performance of the whole thing. Next slide, please. So this is the detailed program as of today. We are lagging 5 minutes behind. We will start with the global synthesis by Ernesto Reyes, and then a summary of action points for GASL stakeholders per region and globally by Nancy Bourgeois. During these two presentations, please use the chat with your questions so we can select from there. And then we will have a conclusion and closing session. I will try to make some overarching conclusions and then hand over the floor to our chair, Fritz Schneider, presenting the new GASL chair and maybe making some other statements. And then I will finally adjourn the moderator, adjourn the meeting, the whole meeting. So with these words, I want to leave the floor to Ernesto Reyes. Again, those of you who are not on the floor, please turn off your videos. Ernesto.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. And then just let me know when you will see. Let me check the configurations. Right. Now you must be looking at the first slide. Does it right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I will start now. Okay, good afternoon, good morning, everybody, all the people around the world. It is a pleasure for the academia and research cluster to contribute to this global synthesis. This is an intensive work that we have been doing during the last week between Nancy, Mauricio, mainly, and Ernesto, but all the staff from the global agenda and all the members of the academia research cluster has been contributing to this. So we have been involved in immersed 2 days of continuous working sessions, and with one topic, which was COVID-19 and sustainable and the future of sustainable livestock. We have been using one approach with 4 domains, in which we have food and security, nutrition, livelihoods and economic growth, animal health and animal welfare, climate and natural resource use. And finally, we have had one global consultations. We have been divided the role in different regions, and each of these regions has been making consultations and proper seminars and webinars to discuss these topics.
Ernesto, Ulf here. We get the message that you should speak closer to the microphone, please.
Okay, thank you. It is better now?
Yeah,
okay.
That's echo, thanks.
Okay, so we have 2 days of working sessions, and the first day that we have had was the global opening with the keynote speakers. We have an animal health expert with Mr. Sumptions, a chief veterinary officer from FIO. We have another analysis of impact on livelihoods with Mr. Nolala, Head of Agricultural and Food Security of the African Union. And finally, during that day, we have the climate change expert, and we have Dr. Henning Steinfeld, Head of Livestock Information Sector Analysis and Policy from FIO. In the second day, as we have mentioned, we had the 8 regions presentations. So having said that, I will start with the first day. And during the first day, we have the topic of animal health. And the topic of animal health was characterized by talking about the ecosystem health and the need for an integrated approach between ecosystem, animal health, and environment. But also, this ecosystem health was or has to be balanced, and the boundaries between ecosystem health and animal productions, we need to find a right balance to make those approaches possible. And this is what was the main element about the ecosystem health. Then it was very remarkable the need of new regulations in terms of food safety, because food safety was emerging as a key element to consider in the transmission in confined places. So we have seen all these value chain and all the production chain with the huge problems during the COVID-19 crisis. But it also was very remarkable the importance on human health and health interactions, safety and food handling and water management, one of the main elements that was commented by our animal health expert. But in fact, I will summarize his presentations with the concept of ecosystem health and its boundaries with animal production. Then we have a second presentation from our African colleague talking about how has been the impact with the United Nations agenda, the SDGs. And I'd say that the main element or the main impact is that people under poverty will increase from 0.2 million to 1 billion people. And just keep in mind that 84% of these poverty people are living on the poverty belongs to rural areas. And most of them rely on livestock to have a daily plate on the table. Then he was remarking that the SDG progress will slow down, but he was making an emphasis on 5 SDGs regarding people out of poverty, regarding nutrition, regarding health, regarding economic growth and climate actions. So what's the main remarks of our African expert? Then he was mentioning that we really need to take clear actions, mainly in the how can we transform these small and medium mixed crops livestock into sustainable and profitable enterprises. He was explaining the need to understand these interactions between crops and livestock in most of the developing regions and how these farming units will need to transform. But also that these kind of producers and farmers are very resilient, but we need to strengthen the resilience of very small scale livestock keepers and pastoralists. So what the main elements commented by Dr. Nolala. And finally, we have been discussing the livestock and climate change. And the topic was approaching that climate change has been accelerated without a proper reply to contain it. And also, livestock has been facing multi-dynamic challenges. Henning Steinfeld was mentioning animal welfare, antimicrobial resistance, and emerging diseases. But also, other challenges coming from the consumer side, from animal source foods, replacements, sustainable food systems, and sustainable diets. These are new elements that are coming into the scenario that we will need to prepare appropriate replies for these. How can we manage this? What are the possible solutions that we were discussing during those days? I think these alternatives that we propose to sustainable livestock must be integrated into a multi-purpose policy framework. We need to clearly think and understand and to introduce in these policy frameworks elements like a natural resource use efficiency, recycling, nature-based solutions like the silvopastoral systems was mentioned also by Dr. Stenfield. And definitely there is a need to balance the consume. And sustainable diet is something that we need to remark, and we need to start thinking on the next coming years if we really want to have a possible solutions to climate change. And then he was remarking the importance and how can we measure progress? How can the livestock sector can show that we have progress, and the need to develop proper metrics within the sustainable analysis. And finally, the importance of the governments being engaged to these policy elements. He was mentioning, for example, the national agreements for climate mitigations as one of the tools that governments are developing to do so. And finally, a special mention was done to responsible productions and processing, and the role that private sector is playing and can play in the future with different initiatives and commitments. So this has been the elements that has been mentioned by the first day. I will take this as a summary for the first day, and if you have no other elements, I will go to the second day. In the second day, we have the regional summaries from 8 regions. English-speaking Africa, French-speaking Africa, Eastern Europe and Central Asia, Latin America, Oceania, Europe, North America, and the rest of Asia. It was the most difficult task before trying to summarize all these incredible seminars and webinars we were conducting. It was very, very tough for the academia and research cluster. These different regions, they have had more than 700 participants from all over the world. This has been a very, very intensive element to mention here, that we were clustering and we were getting all the comments, ideas from these participants. In trying to make a huge effort how to cluster all these discussions, we have been in the cluster, we have been just clustering some of the regions and the African ones and Asia and Latin America, trying to cluster one of the main issues and challenges they were commenting. And I will say that in that regions, the element of One Health is being recognized as an essential approach to apply in those regions. The need to speed up new technologies, digital solutions, it was one of the most remarkable comments that they were coming from these seminars and these meetings. And also the need that research and development should be closer to the farmers' needs, but also closer to the policy design. This is a huge challenge that probably in the global agenda we need to discuss more in detail how we can make research and development closer to these elements. And another one important discussions that they were remarking was we need to rethink business model and innovative approach for value chain consolidations. We have a huge challenges in Asia and in Africa with the young populations coming and with the role of the livestock sector who played in these attending this population's growth. But these challenges must be running back, rethinking innovation, rethinking business approaches, because we need a different approach that different than the one that we have been using. And finally, I will have to say that livestock has demonstrated the significant capacity of being resilient in times of crisis, but they were just making some emphasis for small scale and pastoral production systems that they were resilient because they were not highly dependent on external inputs to play the role in production and providing in food security. I will say that this is one of the major elements. Apologize if we have missed some of the comments you have been discussing during those days, but as I mentioned, it was a quite difficult task. Now let's go for the other half of the regions. We have Oceania, Europe, Eastern Europe and Central Asia and North America. And I think the most important comments was that the government and the role of public-private support trying to manage the storm and the crisis has been important to mention by those regions. But the need that the supply chain has to shift from food service to retail service, this has been the major difficulty that those regions have had during this crisis. So they have to change the model because most of the model was based on the food service, and they have to change that approach. And obviously, that change has been bringing to the table some difficulties because some of the production systems changed where they have to slow down the process of holding back animals to the production units. But in some cases, was quite relatively manageable, but in other cases, like the pig sector or poultry sector, moving animals back was not possible. So obviously, we have a lot of losses linked to this. I think they were mentioning most of the elements. You all know about how this crisis has been impacted. Restrictions in transport, processing workers, consumers getting panic of what they need to purchase, the elements of closing the restaurants, import and export channels getting closer. This is something that has been mentioned in impacted regions. And what's important to mention, especially for Central Asia, that smallholders were facing strong issues previous to the pandemic. So this is something that they were remarking on that element. But if we take into consideration what are the challenges and lessons learned that we all have discussed during those days, we have clustering in two major elements. The need that the global agenda will now need to be in contact with the consumer. We have to stop to speaking between ourselves and we need to raise those elements that are really affecting the livestock sector. And one of the main topics that was discussed during those days has consumer trust. So they were mentioning that there is a mistrust of many consumers in animal products. Highlighted the consumer behavior and role of different consumer segments are changed rapidly, and we need to adapt the production systems to those changes. And also we need to build awareness with consumers of how food is produced. And they were mentioning in some regions, for example, in Latin America, that the livestock sector was recognized as a key element during the crisis, and some of the people were recognizing that trust. And also, they were commenting the demand for healthy food, new forms of delivery and business model. E-commerce is something that has been really important during those times. But I will have to say that consumer trust is something that are really important to the discussion. Just coming to the end, regarding what else we have been discussing as an important topic, I have to mention, or we have to mention the livestock resilience. And livestock resilience of the existing systems, we need to have transitions to sustainability. We can not only say that the livestock sector is resilient, we also have to make that possible and trying to cope with the sustainability challenges we are facing currently. Also, the crucial role of government for support in this process, but also with another type of alliances. Public-private alliances were mentioned in this sense of livestock resilience. And the need to reinforce sustainability frameworks, and there is here we can make a call of the different partners in the global agenda to start having a common view, a common metrics, and the need to develop these sort of frameworks. But also the need to recognize and address that livestock is not only producing food, it also has an important social role to analyze in this process. Producers, farmers, families, workers are people behind all these productions that we need to take into consideration. And the importance of coordinate and make clear communication messages between sectors to achieve consistent elements and strategies of communications. I think yesterday within the debate with the candidates for the position of the global agenda shared, most of the questions were coming, how are we going to communicate? How are we going to be linked to the external elements? How can we stop talking between ourselves? That is needed, obviously, but also how can we communicate outside all these important messages? And finally, the importance of people and their health and safety. But I would like to make a final remark that most of the solutions must be science-based solutions. But again, the important challenge is that science should be close to farmers' needs. From this, I will close my presentation here. It has been a pleasure to lead that global summary. Apologize for those comments or those important suggestions that you have done and probably we have missed it. But I think the time and the intensive work that we have done during those days has made that possible. I would like to thank you for this opportunity, and I will stop now.
Thank you so much, Ernesto, for an excellent presentation and for perfect timekeeping. And I want to encourage all of you to use the chat with comments, questions, and so to Ernesto, and also now, of course, to Nancy when she will present the action points for GASLs that's been synthesized from the various presentations. So with these words, I leave the floor to you, Nancy. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ulf. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone all over the world. It's a great pleasure for me to present the action points highlighted by the regional groups, so all the stakeholders of these regional meetings. I present them, of course, on behalf of my colleagues from the academia and research cluster. Next, please. Eduardo? Thank you. So maybe to recall what was the aim of this global meeting, which has been going on since Monday. So the aim of the global meeting was to identify actions to drive the livestock sector towards more sustainable food systems, to enhance the One Health approach, and to put a stronger focus on food security, of course, to enhance food security. Each region has worked on the topic of the impacts of COVID on the 4 domains, sustainability domains, and they highlighted what solutions and actions already exist, where the gaps are and what needs to be done. So Ernesto has already highlighted what solutions and actions exist. He summarized them. And also to some extent what the gaps are, and I will put the focus on what the needs are and what shall be done from now on. And the results of these summarized action points, they will serve, they will feed into the Delémont meeting next year, or the meeting which will take place next year, most probably in Delémont. So we still expect it to take place in Delémont and in June probably. So please consider that these action points presented today are actually part of a working document. They are not set in stones. They can be completed. Also knowing that the COVID situation is not finished and not knowing what is coming next. So this is, I think, an important element to keep in mind. Next, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Please allow me a preliminary remark or a few remarks. So the regional groups, they responded actually in different ways to the mandate. Sometimes they considered the sustainability domains framework that you see on the right-hand side of this slide. But sometimes they did not consider it, or they did not highlight it according to that framework. The ways of reporting were very different as well. And this resulted in quite varying degrees of reporting detail. Sometimes it was very much detailed, sometimes more summarized. Gaps were not always identified. Action points were not always well defined. And if they were defined, sometimes they were not attributed to GASL's scope of work. There was a mix with other stakeholders' responsibilities. So what we try to do is to highlight the action points within GASL's scope of action whenever possible. And we highlighted this in red. So please keep that in mind. And that's also the reason why the format of the slides is quite different from one region to the other. We did not want to interfere too much in these results so that we can keep these as working action points for the working document. Next, please. So coming to Africa 1, English-speaking Africa, actually this group facilitated quite a lot our task because they already did a lot of clustering and even putting the solutions or the possible action points into the different clusters of GASL. So if we start with the academia and research cluster, the action point seen within the scope of work of this cluster is to look for digital solutions, to promote the multidisciplinary One Health approach, to look for solutions for resilience, to promote the update of research solutions and partnerships, and to provide evidence. So this is what the academia and research cluster is doing already to more or less extent, and this is what is deemed necessary for the future. For the NGO cluster, action points were identified are to support the local capacity, to provide contingency for better resilience, to advocate, to do the work of policy advocacy, to provide local evidence for under the COVID-19 circumstances, and to look for livestock solutions. Coming to the private sector, another cluster of the GASL, to scale or to tailor packaging would be an action point, distribution of inputs, innovative business models, and rebuild markets as well as value chains. So this is where the role of the private sector will be crucial in the coming time. For the social movements, to ensure inclusion, that no one is left behind, to support advocacy, and to engage across different scales and production systems. For the donors, to go beyond the agricultural wider development issues and to include humanitarian issues, etc., to support the sector, to inform priorities, and to invest in digital news solutions. Then for the multilateral organizations, action points to enhance collaboration for One Health solution. So you see again, One Health is appearing, to provide evidence and messaging for advocacy. Advocacy is also strongly present, and to strengthen rebuilding and resilience at local levels. Finally, for the public sector, action points are to support multi-stakeholders engagement, policies and resources for an enabling environment from small scale to large scale and private, etc. And all these action points should help building better the future, or building better after the COVID pandemic. Next, please. So for French-speaking Africa, we did some clustering from our end based on the different feedbacks received for the action points. So we grouped them according to 3 main fields: advocating, informing, and networking. So if you look at advocacy, there is a strong need to position livestock at the center of political discussions expressed in this region of the world. and to sensitize politicians on the role and importance specifically of pastoralism in the dynamics of the livestock sector. So pastoralism is very prominent in the discussion and action points. And this is something which definitely also fits into GASL's role. Another point of action in advocacy is to invest in or to promote the investment in pastoral systems to, for example, to improve pastoral livestock's mobility. And this is strongly linked to the role of the government. To highlight dairy as an essential product in the development of the livestock sector, knowing that the dairy sector is very prominent in this region of the world as well. And to highlight the strength of the local breeds. This is also an element which appeared yesterday on the chat during the presentation of the 3 chair candidates, the biodiversity and the local breeds. Another field of action is to inform in order to support the strengthening of the education of populations in human and animal health. So this is related to One Health, of course, but also to providing evidence and informing people about, so that they are informed with proper information to avoid mistrust and misinformation. Then finally, an area of future work is to network or to strengthen networking in these regions in order to highlight the importance of a strong coordinated and regional strategy. So coordination is very important. To identify stakeholders in the sector, including the informal sector, which is a crucial component, and sometimes it's overlooked. Networking also to reflect on the organization and functioning of the different countries throughout the value chain and potentially harmonize them. This is probably more for the private sector and the governments. Networking to better integrate local structures in projects and crisis management. So that concerns mainly NGOs, associations, municipalities, but not only. And then finally, to strengthen the dialogue between Sahel countries and coastal countries on cross-border mobility of livestock, probably also for the public sector, where government has an important role to play. Another point of action is to support digitalization, the development of digital applications and online sales in pastoral settings. So these were all the priorities for next actions in the French-speaking African region. Next, please. Can you move to the next slide, please? Seems to have a problem. Do you hear me?
Yes.
The slide is on.
The slide is frozen with me. I cannot continue, sorry. Okay. Can you go back, please? Okay, so the next one, please, Eastern Europe. Sorry about that. It was frozen on my end, so I don't know. Okay, so for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, the main points of action was to improve preparedness to crisis. So the focus was really how to prepare the crisis, how to be better prepared so that the crisis can be better overcome in future. So this group identified the 2 main levels. The first one is to identify barriers for investing in preparedness, knowing that it's better to invest money to prepare rather to overcome the crisis later on. And doing this by focusing on a holistic approach. So to look at different forms of shocks and impacts at different spatial and temporal scales, So not only a sudden shock and sudden and large shock like COVID, but all types of shocks. Then addressing all levels of the supply chains and all supply chains, including the farm input level. This is something which came up a few times. We will see it with Oceania as well. Looking at what happens if farm inputs are in a shortage, for example. Then focusing on building resilience and prevention instead of dealing with the impacts. And then focusing on the reduction of dependency on outsourced farm inputs whenever feasible. The second main lever identified in this region was to identify investment opportunities leading to multiple positive effects, such as sustainable economic growth, resilience to crisis and disaster, reduction of negative environmental externalities, and a strong contribution to poverty reduction, especially among the smallholders and the family farmers. So these were the two main levers identified in this region related to the improvement of the preparedness to the crisis. And this by broadening the scope and the time frame of the economic assessment of planned interventions and to capture the aggregated and long-term benefits of prevention measures. So economic assessment is an important aspect as well. Next, please. Coming to Latin America, here the group clustered the action points according to different groups along the value chain or within the livestock sector. So the points for the farmers is to move or to move to the transition to more sustainable systems, for example, by applying agroecology or agroecological approach, by increasing the use and the access to and the use of digital tools, by building partnerships for future, by having capacity building courses on different issues, and also by highlighting the food value of livestock for the consumers and for the whole society. For the industry segment, is to build alliances between the chain actors to highlight the capacity to provide healthy food. This is a society's requirement that was strongly highlighted during the crisis, to show that the industry is capable to provide sufficient and nutritious and healthy food, to give incentives for sustainable livestock systems, and also to apply a systemic and a holistic research approach. So we see that systemic and holistic has appeared a few times already in these different regions. Then finally, for the next for the government, the point of the action points are to support the transition towards more sustainable systems, to improve digital tools, development and access, and to promote the importance of healthy livestock products. So actually also in line with the industry's action points. Then finally, for the academia, it would be to improve connections between research centers and livestock value chain, to improve the research or to develop further research on pasture-based systems, to apply a systemic holistic research approach, taking into account the environment, animal welfare, biosecurity, silvopastoral systems, among others. And finally, to use scientific results to formulate policies. So evidence-based research and communication. Next, please. Coming to the other end of the world, seen from Switzerland, Oceania has highlighted the following action points. One very important point which came out in this working group and throughout the COVID crisis was the importance of working as one and of collaborating. This was really a very strong element of the livestock sector during the crisis in Australia and New Zealand. was also to highlight the fact that a competent governmental response brings credibility and also underpins assurances for sustainability. So having a strong government acting in an appropriate way was deemed as crucial to overcome the crisis and also to move towards more sustainability. Ongoing communication, a very strong point observed in this region. They felt that the stakeholders felt that it was really important to ensure a robust process to oversee information being provided, to accept that things will change and change quickly, and that there is a need to respond. And this is a very delicate task to be able to communicate appropriately towards the society. Another point is a deep understanding and relationships across supply chains. This has been seen in other regions as well. A clear connection between consumer trust in the sector sustainability frameworks and positive responses to COVID. And then probably very specific to this region, or at least expressed as such, this region is highly dependent on trade, on international trade, and the stakeholders of this region highlighted the importance of keeping in mind WTO's role and the rise of protectionism and nationalism worldwide or in specific regions. And COVID-19 may increase challenging on the international trading system. Then finally, in this region, action points were the opportunity to think about additional scenarios to plan for future, for example, feed shortages, problematic access to market, and so on. Next, please. Then coming to Western Europe, the way reporting was done on action points was a bit similar actually to the Central and Eastern Europe regional meetings. So a very strong focus on emergency preparedness, but also intervention, which were deemed essential actually in such a crisis. The different stakeholders in that meeting expressed the need to develop connected circularity with livestock. So this is a concept brought in by Wageningen University to address society's concern related to livestock. And they are numerous, as we know, and this has been already highlighted by Ernesto. To develop scenarios of economic impact of such a crisis, to improve or develop connectivity, finding answers together, to promote transdisciplinarity, and to share information. So points which have been already highlighted in other regions as well. Specific to Europe, to highlight the role of Europe as guiding for the expertise to sustainable production and food production resilience. The Europe value chains and sectors were deemed to have been quite resilient and to have coped with the crisis quite well compared to other regions. Other action points were to improve coordination of efforts and to devote more resources on prevention in general. Next, please. Coming to North America, effective communications were deemed to be key to overcome the crisis. So you see again communication coming up, fostering strong relationships based on trust, value chains where relationships were strong and long-lasting proved to be more resilient than others in this region of the world. Then to develop risk management protocols, to recognize the role of the government to weather the storm. This has been mentioned by Ernesto already. For example, by using financial service or providing financial services, risk insurance schemes, etc. Also to highlight the role of agriculture as essential services, to allow better flexibility, structural flexibility, and the need to foster healthy ecosystems to mitigate exposure and vulnerability in the future. This was a point expressed by NGOs, among others. Next, please. Then coming to the last region, the rest of Asia, which is spanning a lot of countries and yeah, a lot of diverse countries. In these countries, the action points, the main action points mentioned were an early detection, a rapid response, and sustained control. These are deemed necessary and urgent for to overcome the current and also the next crisis. An increase and great attention to environmental health, so the planet health dimension. Support to traditional systems, smallholders and pastoralists, to support small and short value chains, local system, local production and consumption, and to look for better facilities for livestock product handling, processing, storage, and marketing. So better infrastructure, better surveillance, diagnostics, and reporting, and promoting a One Health approach. This is also something which has been brought up a few times. Building platforms for collaboration between farmers, partners, research institutes, governments. So looking at the whole chain or the whole system, and increasing awareness and education of disease across supply chain, especially for small farmers, butchers, and traders. Next, please. So if we summarize all these action points mentioned by different regions, we came up with the following opportunities for the future on which GASL has to build upon. The livestock will remain, is and will remain a crucial component of a systems approach, and this needs to be highlighted more. Preparedness and cost effectiveness are very important aspects, and there is a need for governments to invest money to anticipate such crises rather than to overcome them. There is also a strong need expressed to rethink business models for more resilience. Resilience is a word which came up probably most throughout these meetings, by using smaller scale, more systematic approaches. Also a strong word or concept mentioned many times is the holistic approach, which is needed to move towards more sustainable systems. Then to identify barriers towards more resilience and more sustainability is also crucial. What hampers everyone to move towards this, towards more sustainability? As I mentioned already, the reduction of producers' dependency, for example, on inputs was expressed a few times. Then highlighting the importance of sound policies based on scientific results. The One Health approach, which came out very prominently, not only about considering human and animals, but also taking into account the whole planetary health. The importance of dialogue and coordinated solutions between stakeholders. A need for regional GASL chapters. This is something that has been discussed already before, but this came out probably more prominently this time. That many issues can be tackled on a regional basis to take into account the regional specificities. The importance of trade agreements to keep markets open in times of crisis. And this is not only Oceania, but Europe and other regions, of course. And to build trusted supply chain partnerships committed to sustainability frameworks. So these are the main fields for the future actions by GASL, but also by other stakeholders. Next, please. And this brings us to the final slide. So we tried to summarize to summarize these different words and concept and action points presented by the different regional groups into one slide, which is a little bit a challenge. So this is a working slide. It can be completed or amended, of course, but we thought that would be a good basis for next year's meeting. So we highlighted the key elements. So a better preparedness for such crisis for the next one to come, considering One Health and including planetary health, not only human and animals, fostering resilience, looking at the whole system with a holistic approach and a systems approach. So the systems approach considers people, the society, the planet, animals, of course, but also economic and social dimensions. Not forgetting the 4 sustainability domains GASL is working with as a framework. What I could have, or we could have added is, of course, the UN agenda, the 2030 SDGs in the background. We should not forget them. They sometimes tend to be pushed a bit in the background, but they are actually the framework GASL is working within. And the key actions for GASL, but of course for all stakeholders, is to provide scientific evidence. I think this is something which came up really strongly. There is not enough scientific evidence to inform properly people, and even if this evidence is there, there is a need for better communication. A need also, or an action for GASL, is to foster sound policies, to enhance the dialogue. This is what GASL is all about, but there is always room to continue and to improve in all these aspects. Communication, as mentioned already, to connect better. And this is probably one new challenge, or a big challenge ahead, also to connect with the consumers, to connect with the outside world, that we are not always talking only to convinced people or to the converted, but trying to make the point to other people as well outside GASL. And to promote transdisciplinarity is another field of potential actions. So with this, my contribution would be at the end. I thank everyone for the contributions, so my colleagues from the Academia and Research Cluster, Ulf, Rogerio, Ernesto, Liz, and Alexandre, and of course, all the people who contributed to the regional meetings and to the global meetings this week. And of course, to the support team in Rome and to Fritz for all their great support. Thanks a lot. Over to you, Ulf.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Excellent presentation. I think I see in the chat here, it's highly appreciated. And also perfect timing. Now we have some 30 minutes, I think, here for questions from the audience via the chat, and Rogerio and I have collected some of them. If your questions or comments are not highlighted orally here, we will for sure collect them from the chat and massage them into the final report from us into this. So don't be disappointed if I don't highlight them here. So the first one, and I think you, Ernesto, could perhaps respond to that. How do we get scientists to work with the farmers to get solutions? A brief respond to that.
Yes, I think it has been raised, and we have been discussing in GASL how we can keep linked to the farmers. And we have been discussing some issues with representativeness and with some issues of how to cope regionally, speaking with the farmers. But I think we in GASL do really need to have a representative of the farmer sector in one of the in some of the clusters, in order to discuss all the points that we have been raising and we have been agreeing, GASL, how we can keep them together with the farmers. I think this is more than a comment, is an urgent need that we need to cope in GASL to getting closer to the farmers, because through this is the only way that we can assure farmers' representativeness in this sense.
Thank you so much, Ernesto. And the next one here is to you, I think, Nancy. It's about advocating for pastoralists' mobility. Is there a stronger role for GASL in this, or what do you think? Could you comment on that?
Yes, I think that GASL's role is to communicate on the strength, but also on the weaknesses of systems or value chains or sectors, and to be honest enough to show the potential problems, but also to show the strengths. Of course, all the communication should be based on evidence. So, I mean, if this concerns pastoralism, but also other sectors. With pastoralism, we know that in many regions of the world, not all of them, but in many regions of the world, pastoralists are seen as backward, as not efficient and so on. We know this is an old story, and there is evidence that this is not the case. So I think one of the challenges to show with this evidence the strong points of pastoralism in many regions, and to make these points more visible to the people who decide, to the policymakers, to the government. So I think GASL has definitely a role in that regard, a great role to play, actually. Yes.
Thank you. And then I have another one for you, Nancy. Sorry for that. And this is a more complex one, but we want to hear your even more complex. And that is the issue of short value chains. I think this closing national borders, et cetera, have shown a vulnerability in trade and so, and people are refocusing on domestic production, short value chains, and selling in scenes. So, and then on the other hand, these restrictions crashes the international trade. So this is it's a political question, I think. Could you elaborate on this a little bit? There are tensions, isn't it?
Yeah, there are definitely tensions, and you know, even if the international trade did not stop, or at least the broad regional trade did not stop in some regions or many regions. For example, in Europe, we did not experience disruption of crucial products. Actually, the chains worked very well, but at the same time, the consumers, they, at least in Switzerland, but I think it was the case also in other countries, consumers, they suddenly started going to farmers, and they wanted to buy fresh meat, fresh vegetables, whatever was fresh from the farmers. So really acknowledging the role of farmers, of proximity, in the kind of trust, as if they would trust more the local farmers suddenly. What was and actually, it's strange that many people did this, because if they had gone to the supermarkets, they would have still found veal meat and tomatoes and whatever. So that was sometimes a little bit a strange reaction. I think the only thing which was really missing was flour and stuff to make bread. That's, I think, what was missing in the supermarkets. But anyway, and now that the situation is kind of almost back to normal again, people switch again to supermarkets. So it's a kind of a strange reaction of people, a panic reaction in a way to move towards shorter cycles, and this is gone again. But actually, the situation, the worldwide situation with trade has not changed. So I think that a lot of probably more research in consumers' behavior is needed to answer this question about shorter value chains in such times. But definitely, short value chain have to proven to be efficient, and farmers, at least in Europe, they were very reactive. Okay. Even putting online sale over the weekend and so on. So quite reactive. I don't know if I answered the question properly. But
you enlightened us. Thank you. There is no answer to this question, I think. If I move to you, Ernesto, there is a question here, or a reflection, if you can elaborate on that. And that is the statement in one of your slides saying, resilience of existing systems need for a transition towards sustainability. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Uz. No, I think when we were discussing in one of the days about the resilience of the smallholders and resilience of the livestock sector, we were also involving the elements that resilience is not only to cope with the crisis, resilience is not only to resist in difficult times. Resilience is also how can we adapt our systems to a more sustainable systems, and this is a journey that we need to go from now, and we need to follow onwards, because it's not only because to convince by ourselves that livestock is resilient. I think we will need to measure where we are, we need to measure where we would like to go, and we need to know when and how are we arriving to that sustainability concepts. And then linked to this was the need for metrics to measure that process. And this is the transitions that we are looking for, measuring, knowing the starting point, and knowing where we would like to go.
Thank you so much, Ernesto, for this clarification. There's one question or a reflection about regional initiatives, for instance, platforms for One Health work. And I think it's a generic one in the sense of more regional initiatives for the GASL. Nancy, do you have any comment or to the regional approaches? I think this multi-stakeholder meeting with all the regional meetings, we have engaged 700 people. It shows the commitment around the world, but to create more, how to say, firm structure as a One Health platform, for instance, in Asia. Do you have any comments to that, Nancy?
Well, probably it would be more up to the people working specifically on health to answer, or people or maybe Fritz on behalf of the global agenda at the end. I think generally the need to have a regional platform has been expressed before that consultation. That has been an element discussed before to have regional GASL platforms, not only the overall one. So this discussion will probably continue or even become stronger. More specifically on the One Health approach, well, I don't know if the forms would be very different, but I would tend to say that to take into account the different situations in the different part of the world, it would make sense to have different platforms on this specific approach, but that these platforms are definitely connected with each other, because as we know, many of these diseases are of pandemic nature. So working on ASF and so on, working on zoonotic diseases. Many of them are transboundary diseases. So having regional classes can help to grasp the regional specificities, but then they should definitely be linked together. And my guess is that there is already such a system within the OIE, but I would let the people from the OIE respond, and because this is not my specific field of action.
I think it's good enough for now. Thank you. But it's a governance thing, and we will hear what our chair, Fritz, says about regional commitments, because that has been suggested in some of the regional meetings for creating regional chapters and so on. Exactly. I think there's pros and cons on that. One quite different aspect that's coming up in the chat is about communication outside the livestock sector about livestock, the bad press that has been circulating. I see big regional differences here, disinformation, and so. Should we ask Ernesto first to comment on that, and then you can take a rest, Nancy, and think. And from your perspective, I think South America versus Europe.
Sorry, Ulf, I didn't get your point. What's the regional chapters of GASL?
No, the communication about bads and goods with livestock. Livestock in many settings or many regions of the world is under medial pressure from the media. Okay. And how do we who have the insight, how do we communicate this better, the good things? Okay. There are of course bad things as well.
I think it's just following the journey that we have been following in the global agenda. The first step was to have a platform to discuss together. The second element was an agreement of what messages to discuss. And I think we are moving to the third phase, is how we can communicate externally the role of livestock. And for doing so, we have been, I can just give you an example of the things that we are doing in the Action Network Livestock for Social Development. That now we are providing metrics, now we are providing evidence of the impact of the livestock sector in socioeconomic terms. What is the value of livestock to the social development? And this is something that we really need to work it out. I would say we need to have a clear messages about the socioeconomic role of the livestock first. And in this regard, the second element that was highlighted yesterday in the debate, how can we really develop an efficient communication strategy? And it was very much remarkable, the need to have access to the consumers. How can we communicate to the society? How can we have the faster access that other media has in terms of providing every week something related with the livestock? I think there is a clear need to develop, and this, I guess, will be the next big challenge for GASL, is how we stop of talking between ourselves, and now how can we develop a talk outside, externally, of GASL. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and when we interviewed the candidates yesterday for the new chair, that was one of the key elements, as said before. Do you want to add something to this, Nancy?
Yes, I think it was Shirley yesterday who mentioned that we should show stories or tell stories about the importance of livestock for the people, because when we talk to people who do not know anything about agriculture, about livestock production, when you show them a real person with problems, with hopes, with families, friends, and so on, and you highlight the importance of livestock for that specific person, for that family, I think the people in front of you just react differently, and they start thinking because they see the link to the reality. Always showing scientific based evidence is crucial, but what is crucial is to transform these evidence into stories which people can understand. So I think this is really the great challenge, and also of course the channels to make these stories reach the wider public, the wider audience, are key to that communication. How to reach many people outside the livestock sector and telling them simple stories, but based on evidence. I think this is a crucial challenge for GASL and for every one of us.
If I make something that is very much related to the comments, for example, Pablo Freire.
Hold on. No, I think I picked it. Yeah, thanks. There's another aspect that is coming up, and that is the resilience issue. We talk a lot about the resilience here versus efficiency. Do you have any comment to that? If you start, Ernesto?
No, I was just picking some of the comments from the chat.
Yeah, but yeah, okay.
No, and it's very much related to this. For example, from Pablo Freire is commenting there is a low visibility of the contribution to the nourishment of society for small scale families or from the livestock sector. And I think this is something that we are working in. And then the Walter also was commenting from Uruguay that resilience is an emerging a topic to the livestock now, first. Second, apart from that, is very complex to start measuring resilience, because we need to previously discuss how are we going to approach that element. But I will say that in that sense, metrics, we need, if we related what Nancy was mentioning, yes, we need to communicate that we are resilient, we need to communicate the importance of livestock, but the issue is how can we measure this?
Okay.
That everybody accept what we are saying and measure, is being measured.
Thank you so much. Nancy, is there a tension between efficiency and resilience? What's your take on that?
But if this relates to the efficiency mentioned during the summary, I think the efficiency mentioned during the summary was mostly related to the preparedness to the crisis, as far as I remember. So having the governments or having the money used in a more efficient way in order to anticipate crisis, to invest the money to anticipate the crisis and to prepare the sector better, so that the impact is not as devastating as it has been. So this is how I interpreted the efficiency issue in all the summary. Then coming to resilience, I would tend to agree with Ernesto. I think one of the challenge really is how to measure resilience. We observed some sectors were extremely resilient, some less. The impact is different, of course, but how to measure resilience? What makes a system more resilient than the other? Yeah, how these metrics aspect mentioned by Ernesto, I think are really a challenge. Yeah, and I would tend to say that a resilient system is more efficient in the end, because if it's resilient, it's not causing as much negative impacts or devastating impact as it has with less resilient systems. But I don't know. if this is evidence-based, and this is our observation at the moment. So we will have to find indicators and measure this resilience and effectiveness things.
Yeah, one way here by our colleague Rogerio is to look into the efficiency gap in natural resource use is one way to. So there are perhaps ways to do this. There's one, maybe you, Ernesto, can elaborate on this a little bit. We have mentioned a lot about the One Health, and one question here is about wildlife and wildlife systems, and what is the limitations for the mandate of the GASL relating to wildlife and ecosystems, or are there no limitations or boundaries? What is your thought on that, Ernesto?
I think we haven't discussed properly yet within GASL the elements of boundaries between wildlife and animal production. I think this is something new. We have to at least in my case, we have to recognize this. And this is something really important. And the concept of One Health is also new in terms of GASL discussions. And I would say that is something that we need to digest. Sorry for not answering properly that approach, but I guess it's one of the pending issues we need to address in the next GASL sessions and in the next GASL seminars, because it's something new that is coming. Ecosystem health, One Health, resilient. There are topics that we are now gathering and clustering for future discussions.
Mm-hmm. May I add on this, Ulf?
Yeah, I wanted you to add on that, please.
You know, when it's quite interesting, because when I was living in Asia, I experienced the SARS outbreak. I was in Vietnam at the time SARS broke out in Vietnam, and after that there was a lot of money devoted to research on the role of wildlife in pandemics, the role of wildlife in zoonotic diseases, in emerging disease, and so on. There were a lot of projects. The USA were financing a lot of projects, the World Bank as well. I worked as a consultant for the PREVENT project at that time, financed by USAID. So there was a lot of effort, a lot of money invested in that. And I think with the time, people tended to, I don't know, forget or to. SARS was quite contained after a few months, and I have a little bit the feeling that, I mean, people tend to forget, and now the pandemic with the SARS, the new SARS, the COVID, is a wake-up call, because we know that such pandemics will come again and again. So I think probably now everyone realized the importance of investigating and try to find out all the interface between humans, animals, livestock, but domestic animals as well, and wildlife, and overall the whole ecosystem health. So this is not new. This has been going on since now 15 years, but it went a bit behind the scene until this year, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you for these words. We are approaching 15:30, and I want to make sure that the support team is saving the chat, because we have a lot of important statements there, and so we could move on to next slides, please. Thank you so much for Ernesto and Nancy for this almost impossible questions, but it has been very interesting to hear your views. And it has enriched us quite a lot. Thank you so much. So I have given the impossible task to make some conclusions from this, and so we can have the first slide about observations. We have had 700 brains generating and by the way, we are 107 persons online. That is great. 700 brains that has contributed to what we have been listening to and seen over the last days. I think that is fantastic, and there has not always been related to lessons from the COVID-19. It has more perhaps also been on a way to a more sustainable livestock sector. And I think all these presentations and thoughts that we have collected over the days and from the regional meetings, presentations, etc., is a fantastic source for GASL to work with, and also the psychological factors, if I put it like that, that we get a very global engagement from various regions of the world. But I tried to tease out some observations here on the conclusions side that are related actually to the COVID-19. Some of them has been mentioned several times, and so one observation is that the COVID-19 has aggravating existing challenges or issues for the sector: food security, livelihood, economic hardship, etc., etc. I think that is an important lesson. And also it's disclosing the vulnerability throughout the animal source food systems. They vary by regions, by economic settings, by farm size, and the dependence on export and import. And there are, to put it very bluntly, maybe winners and losers. I think this is, I'd say, is a stress test of the animal source food system that we can learn from without being cynic. Also, we have to remember that this crisis is affecting the livelihood for many poor livestock farmers. Even though we are using more shorter value chains, I think this is the case indeed. We have, even though that the COVID-19 is not coming from the livestock production, is not involved in that, but the importance on One Health and a more resilient livestock production to handle these kind of shocks. That is observation that is recurring from all regions, from all presentations. I think that is something we have to handle in the future. And also about handling is I put disinformation here. Sometimes it's misunderstandings, and so it varies a lot between regions, between countries, and it's not only the social media and by purpose, it's also mistakes, UN reports that are misinterpreted, etc., etc. And we have to be careful what we are saying to laymen, and so, because could easily be misunderstood. And I think this is this kind of new media landscape or communication landscape. That is something that we have to live with in the future and handling. One point that I was a little bit, how to say, encouraged by, I think it was our friends in North America that said that the government were acknowledging the livestock or announcing that the livestock sector was essential for the society in the crisis. That is fantastic that this happens in high-income countries where there's usually not a food security issue to say. And everyone says that there is stronger need for collaboration and partnership. That is something that is coming all the time. So could we have next slide, please? About the action points. Both for these overall sustainability discussions that we have had and also for the lesson learned. I think, again, we have to, considering the comparative advantage of GASL, which is our niche, where can we have the best leverage, so to say. That is something we have to keep in our mind. GASL cannot do everything. And then I want to quote Henning Steinfeld, and he was quoting someone else. There is no glory in preparedness. And how do we make investments in disease prevention and resilience to other kind of shocks for the food system happening? We are saying we have to make more preparedness. We have to create a more resilient animal source food system. And we have measures or data that it's much more cost efficient to invest in prevention than to react like we now do against the COVID-19 crisis. We all know that, and politicians know this, but they have often in the democratic world, they do have 3-4 years of mandate, and this to make these kind of priorities, and also for farmers to make things more resilient. This issue of insurance problems, you have to have both the motivation, the incentives, and then of course also the resources to make this happen. And this is a human or global dilemma for many features in the society, I think, to think ahead versus short-term gains. And sometimes you don't have the resources, you don't have the motivation. I think this, not what kind of investments and or measures, but how do we convince people, to politicians, others, to make these kind of investments. Then the One Health, we have touched that several times, yes, but how wide is GASL's mandate? And classically the One Health is livestock health, ecosystem health, and human health. And I think this human health and animal health, that is quite well explored relatively, whereas this ecosystem thing is less explored. And most of the, almost every infectious or zoonotic disease with a pandemic potential comes from wildlife. Sometimes the flus could go via, it comes from water birds, go via domestic animals, but the other ones jump directly from wildlife to humans. And how do we handle the wildlife situation and the interfaces there? I think that needs some thinking, so we don't take a too big cake on our plate. And then finally, about dissemination of evidence-based information. I think as a multi-stakeholder body, we have a sound and broad perspective. We have researchers, we have practitioners, we have producers of various kinds and private sector and so on. And I think if we can really contribute in a sound way, and then the issue that has been raised several times, we should not only talk internally, it's have to go out, and how do we do that in a balanced, non-defensive way? I think that is an issue. I think I stop here, and I see in yeah, there are opinions about the One Health, what should be involved there. But I think I stop here, and then we move to next slide. And I want to hand over the floor to our dear Fritz Schneider. The Zoom here don't allow us to cheer and applaud and so, but you can use the chat. I think we should thank him so much for his fantastic work over the years. And I leave the floor to you, Fritz, please.
Thank you, Ulf. And you know, it's a privilege of the chair to delegate the impossible tasks. So I was very happy to do this today to you. And thank you very much for your excellent moderation. I have decided to turn this around. I will first welcome the newly selected GASL chair. Next slide, please. And now we should cheer. Kindly welcome Shirley Tarawali, the new chair of GASL. The election was yesterday, 17 September, by the guiding group by consensus. We had 22 guiding group members, and at the end of the meeting, we had consensus that we want to have Shirley as our next chair. I would like to inform you a bit on the process. There was a FAO public vacancy announcement. Then there was a screening of the short list of 15 candidates to the guiding group members. And the guiding group members were able to cast 3 votes and nominate 3 finalists. So we then had 3 finalists, and we had yesterday an externally moderated public debate with 2 finalists, because 1 finalist withdrew shortly before the debate yesterday afternoon. And then the guiding group meeting elected a new chair, and as I mentioned, we did this by consensus. Next slide. Who is Shirley Tarawali? Actually, I think most of the 103 people online would probably not have to, do not need an introduction, but I still do it. Shirley is Assistant Director General at the International Livestock Research Institute based in Nairobi, Kenya. Her responsibilities are strategy, planning, partnerships, communications, and knowledge management, as well as institutional management, decision-making, and representation. She's also secretary to the ILRI Board of Trustees. Prior to this, Shirley led an ILRI research team with responsibilities across sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, and including scientific coordination and leadership of a portfolio covering livestock environment, animal nutrition, and natural resource management. Shirley has over 30 years of experience implementing and leading research for development in Africa and Asia. Shirley holds a PhD in plant science from the University of London, UK. Next slide, please. Shirley is not new to GASL. Shirley has been in the meeting in March 2010 in Zollikofen in Switzerland, where the idea of the global agenda was created. It was at the launch of the publication Livestock in a Changing Landscape. And Shirley has been with GASL ever since. Shirley has attended 7 of the 9 MSP meetings of GASL. At that time, we were still able to do them face to face. Shirley is a guiding group member for the Multilateral Organizations Cluster. She has been in a task force to develop the action plan 19 to 21. She has been in a task force to develop the theory of change recently. And she has been the lead author for the input paper on livelihood and economic growth for the 2019 MSP meeting in Kansas. Shirley has moderated GASL events, always excellent job. And she has been in the organizing committee for the 7th MSP of Global Agenda in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia in 2017. Next slide, please. Now, Shirley, you have the chance to introduce yourself. We are looking forward and we really welcome you wholeheartedly. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fritz. And thank you too for all the confidence placed in me. I'm really humbled and honored by that. In making a few remarks at this juncture, there's really only one place that I must and can begin. And that's by acknowledging the very big shoes and the mighty footsteps that I'm about to step into. Fritz, you've been a really outstanding chair of GASL. You've played a critical role to help mature GASL from something akin to a multi-stakeholder experiment to a more mature partnership with procedures and structures in place. You have helped to start that process that we've just talked about of putting livestock on the global development stage. I look forward to working through a transition with you and to you remaining a key member of GASL. All of us might continue to benefit from your wisdom and experience. Let me also thank the agenda support team, the guiding group, and indeed all members and participants, many of you colleagues over many years, as well as the investors in GASL. From this week's and earlier regional meetings, for considerable and tireless support across GASL's many dimensions over many years. Thanks to my colleagues in ILRI, especially our Director General, our management team, and communication colleagues for the support and encouragement, and especially for teaching me so much that I hope I'll be able to use in this new role. Thanks to Fabiana and Walter, and to several colleagues who've already written and expressed their support. I really look forward to working with you as well as with many, many others. And I look forward to building on the strengths of GASL today, to harness the power of the diverse membership, whether it's from local to global, small to large scale, every type of stakeholder. Noting we want to bring more and we want to be able to connect with farmers and consumers more as well. Institutions and individuals, because without you, GASL would not exist. But with you and those yet to join, integrating and making the most of this diversity at a time when it's never been more needed, I believe that we can ensure that the contributions of a sustainable livestock sector to sustainable development will be realized, not least to resilient, sustainable, healthy, and inclusive food systems of the future. The actions identified from this week's deliberations and so wonderfully summarized and deliberated by our colleagues from the research cluster just now, it's a fantastic resource to go forward, a great starting point to be joined together with all the other ongoing activities. So that's a fantastic place to begin. It's a big challenge. Fritz has told me that he's sleeping well now. And he also, after yesterday's quite deep experience with the debate, said that that was only the beginning and it was going to continue like that. So a big challenge ahead, but one that I look forward to because I know that I have the support, and I look forward to the engagement with each and every one of you. And Fritz, you've just given me another really good tip, and that is to delegate the impossible tasks. So I'll definitely take that one on board as well. Again, thank you all very, very much, and I really look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Shirley. I'm looking forward to the transition period, which will happen from now onwards to the end of October. We will have a guiding group meeting end of October to then finalize the handing over. Thank you very much, Shirley, and welcome.
Thank you, Fritz. Thanks.
Now can I have the next slide? Okay. I will not do the summary of the summary of the summary. I think the academic and research team has done an excellent job, and then also the final remarks of Ulf are actually summarizing it nicely. But allow me anyway a few remarks. The virtual MSP has shown that livestock remains a crucial and relevant component in all food systems. I think that has been shown very prominently. And we have also learned that resilience has become an important dimension, and we have to take care of that, and we have to discuss in GASL how we will tackle this challenge. We also have heard that One Health is much more important. And Ulf has rightly questioned, well, what is where are the borders for GASL? Where does the mandate start and where does it end? But I think it's very important to have organizations like OAE, ILRI on board. I think that is really very important. And we also have learned that multi-stakeholder processes are key. And that means the global agenda has even become more important. A very interesting element is actually the proposal for regional GASL chapters. We will need to discuss that. But I also would like to remind or to recall that the global agenda has always advocated for context-specific solutions. And we had regional meetings in the Ukraine, in Brazil. We have supported the Mongolia agenda for sustainable livestock. And we have also had the MSPs in different regions, countries, and always had a regional focus. So in that sense, we can build on that and actually strengthen our regional approach. I think that is very important and absolutely timely looking at COVID-19. So to conclude, I can say that GASL is well placed to contribute and to tackling the challenges ahead. Can I have the next slide, please? The virtual MSP meeting from 31 August to today, we had, it also has already been mentioned, 8 regional meetings with, I had more than 600, somebody said 700 registrations, and more than 400 real participation. We had more than 50 persons, guiding group members, action network members, GASL members and others to organize and conduct the 8 regional meetings. We, the agenda support team and me, we were really very impressed how quickly the regions were willing and people in the regions were willing to organize these regional meetings. And we had involvement of all GASL clusters and all action networks. We had 4 global sessions with more than 200 registrations and up to 110 participants in one single session. So in that sense, this MSP is actually the largest GASL event in terms of involvement of GASL members and interested participants ever. Can we have the next slide? Now, the only thing I can do here now is to thank everybody. I first want to thank the participants of the regional global sessions, the organizers, speakers at regional meetings, and organizers, speakers of the global sessions. I would like to thank the guiding group members from Academia Research Cluster to summarize in the report. A huge task, extremely well done. The moderators of the global sessions, the chair finalists, Shirley and Fabiana. But I also want to thank Henning Steinfeld, Eduardo Arcedias, and Lavinia Scudiero for their enormous work they have done in the last weeks. And of course, I also thank the interpreters and FAO audiovisuals teams. With this, I again thank you very much. We should clap our hands now, and I give the floor back to Ulf. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much, Fritz and Shirley. This is a pleasure. Before adjourning the whole meeting, I want to make some announcements. You have to check or you should check the website of GASL, because there you will see announcements coming up from the action networks. We will arrange webinars in the coming year that could be of interest for you. Also, there are reports coming up on the COVID-19 impact, etc., relating to this. So please look into this. And then foremost, next MSP meeting, it will in one way or another be held in Switzerland the 7th to 11th of June next year. We will come back with information regarding that. And then I take me the liberty to repeat what Fritz was saying, since he was repeating me. I want to a special thank to the Agenda support team, Henning Steinfeld, Eduardo, and Lavinia, for making this challenging, great meeting possible. I think it has been working very, very well. And then most of all, a big thank you to Fritz. To you, you have been a fantastic chair. And I just called, in the meantime here, I called our IT department whether it would be okay to open all the mics and give an applaud to you, but they advise me not to encouraging you to do that, because then the FAO servers will crash, and then we are out of business in our relationship to FAO. With these words, I close this fantastic meeting. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Ulf.
Thank you, bye.
Many thanks, Ulf. Many thanks for facilitating this meeting.